Every mobster stood when he walked in. Every mobster except one. Lucky Luciano's bodyguards reached for their guns. The most powerful man in organized crime stood frozen, because the black man sitting in his chair didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there with a cigar burning between his fingers. Bumpy Johnson. And in the next 60 seconds, one photograph would change the rules of power forever. February 1946, Manhattan's Stork Club, the most exclusive nightclub in America. Crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light across red velvet walls, thick carpet that swallowed sound, the air heavy with cigar smoke and expensive cologne. Frank Sinatra's voice drifted from the main room below, the kind of room where deals got made that changed the shape of the underworld. Lucky Luciano had a problem. In 3 weeks, the federal government was deporting him to Italy, permanently. 9 years in Dannemora prison, one of the hardest stretches in New York. Then the war came. The government needed his help. Italian docks, submarine threats, supply lines for the invasion of Sicily. Luciano delivered. In return, they commuted his sentence. But freedom came with a price. Exile. He could leave prison, but he couldn't stay in America. The only country he'd ever known was kicking him out forever. Before he left, Luciano needed to secure his empire. The 5 families were in order. Frank Costello ran his family. Vito Genovese was contained. Albert Anastasia controlled the waterfront. Meyer Lansky handled the money. Everything was set except Harlem. The numbers racket made millions every week. Poor folks betting nickels and dimes that added up to fortunes, and the Italians wanted in. They'd tried before. 1935, Dutch Schultz muscled into Harlem with guns and violence, burned businesses, beat numbers runners. Thought black folks would just hand over their money. Dutch thought wrong. There was an enforcer working for Stephanie St. Clair, quiet, well-dressed, educated himself in prison reading Shakespeare, moved like a chess player, always 3 moves ahead. Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy didn't just fight Dutch Schultz, he outsmarted him, made his operation bleed money, made his men afraid to collect. October 1935. Dutch Schultz walked into a Newark restaurant, ordered a steak. 3 men walked in behind him. By the time the ambulance arrived, Dutch was bleeding out on the floor. The official story said it was a commission hit, but everyone in Harlem knew. Dutch tried to take what wasn't his. Bumpy made sure he paid the price. Now, 11 years later, Luciano wanted to try again, but smarter. He sent word. Let's meet. Just talk. Bumpy didn't respond for 7 days. That silence told Luciano everything. This wasn't going to be easy. February 18th, 1946, 8:45 p.m. The VIP room door opened. Bumpy Johnson walked in alone. No bodyguards, no crew, no backup. Just one man walking into a room with 6 killers and their guns, 40 years old, 5'9". But he moved through that door like he owned the building. Navy blue 3-piece suit tailored so perfectly it could have been painted on. White shirt starched crisp, no tie. He never wore ties. Said they felt like nooses. Gold watch chain catching the chandelier light with each step. Shoes polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the red carpet beneath him. Leather briefcase in his right hand. Brown, well-worn. The kind that had seen boardrooms and back alleys and knew the difference. His face was a mask. Not aggressive, not afraid. Just present. The face of a man who'd walked into 1,000 dangerous rooms and walked out of every single one. The bodyguards moved, hands inside jackets. Luciano raised one finger. Let him through. Bumpy walked past them like furniture. His footsteps echoed, then went silent on the thick carpet. He reached the table where 6 men sat. Frank Costello, Albert Anastasia, Meyer Lansky. 3 bodyguards against the walls. Bumpy pulled out the chair at the head of the table, Luciano's chair, and sat down. The temperature dropped. Nobody sat in Lucky Luciano's chair. That chair was sacred, a symbol of power everyone understood. But Luciano smiled. He understood. This wasn't disrespect. This was a test. Bumpy was establishing terms before anyone spoke. Luciano took the seat across from him, eye to eye. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming." Bumpy opened his briefcase, pulled out a Cuban cigar, bit off the end, spit it in the ashtray, lit it with a gold lighter. He took a long drag, exhaled slowly. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Luciano folded his hands. "I'm leaving America in 3 weeks. Deportation, Italy, permanent. Before I go, I need to secure New York. The 5 families are set. Frank runs my family. Vito's contained. Albert controls the waterfront. Meyer handles money." He paused. "Harlem is the last piece." Bumpy's eyes shifted. This was the moment. "The numbers racket makes millions every week," Luciano continued. "My people want in. But I know you've been running things since Dutch died. You've got the trust, the infrastructure, the police on payroll." He leaned back. "I'm not here to take what's yours. I'm offering partnership. You keep running Harlem. We provide protection, capital, connections. In return, we take 40% of profits." 40%. Bumpy took another drag. "What happens if I say no?" Luciano's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "Then we have a problem. If you're not with us, you're against us, and nobody survives being against us." It was said with absolute certainty. Bumpy set his cigar down, slow, careful. Then he reached for his briefcase. Everyone tensed. Costello's hand disappeared inside his jacket. Anastasia stood halfway up. Bodyguards drew weapons, safeties clicking off. Luciano didn't move, just watched. Bumpy opened the briefcase, pulled out a single photograph, black and white, 8 by 10. He slid it across the table. Luciano picked it up. His face didn't change. Decades of poker games and police interrogations had taught him perfect control. But his fingers tightened around the edges, just slightly. Just enough that everyone who knew him saw it. The photograph showed a warehouse, Red Hook, Brooklyn, waterfront, loading docks in the background, crates stacked like building blocks, one of Albert Anastasia's gambling operations, and standing in front of the warehouse shaking hands with a man in an NYPD captain's uniform was Albert Anastasia himself. Clear as day, no shadows, no question. The light was perfect. The angle was professional, the kind of photograph that ended careers, ended lives, the kind that turned protection into prosecution. "That was taken 3 days ago," Bumpy said quietly. His voice was conversational, like he was discussing the weather or last night's fight at the Garden. "I've got 12 more just like it, different warehouses, different cops, different members of your organization." He paused. "Let that information settle like snow. Your protection with the NYPD. It's built on relationships that can't be exposed. Cops who look the other way as long as nobody looks at them. But if these photographs end up in the wrong hands, if the newspapers get them, if the district attorney's office sees them..." He didn't finish. The silence finished for him. The room went deathly quiet. Anastasia stood completely up. His face had gone red. "You threatening us?" Bumpy didn't even look at him. Kept his eyes on Luciano. "Are you threatening me?" Luciano asked. "No." Bumpy leaned forward. "I'm showing you respect. I could have sent these to the DA, to the newspapers. Could have burned your operation before you knew I had them. But I didn't." He picked up his cigar. "You came asking for partnership, but partnership means equals. What you offered wasn't partnership. It was a takeover with a smile. 40% and our protection. That's not partnership, that's tribute." Luciano set the photograph down carefully. For the first time, he looked genuinely impressed. "So what do you want, Bumpy?" Bumpy let the question hang in the smoke. "You want what Schultz wanted, what every Italian crew that's ever looked at Harlem has wanted. Control, complete control. The money, the streets, the people. But you can't have it, not because you're not smart enough. Charlie, you're the smartest man in this room. Not because you're not strong enough. You've got more soldiers than I could count. Not because you're not connected enough. You've got politicians, judges, cops in your pocket." He pointed toward the window, toward the lights of Uptown glowing in the distance. "You can't have it because Harlem isn't yours to control, and it never will be. Schultz failed because he thought black people were stupid, thought we'd just hand over our money and say thank you, thought muscle was enough, thought fear was enough, but Harlem doesn't work that way." He turned back to the table. You need trust. You need respect. You need to be one of us. And no disrespect, Charlie, but you'll never be one of us." His voice dropped, got quieter, more intense. "In Harlem, I'm not just running numbers. I'm protecting the community. When cops shake down black businesses, I make it stop. When landlords evict families who can't pay, I pay it. When stores charge us double, I make them regret it. I'm not just a gangster. I'm a shield. You come in with your 40% and your soldiers visible on corners, and you know what happens? You become the enemy. And when you're the enemy in Harlem, you don't win. You just bleed money until you give up or die trying." Costello started to speak. Luciano silenced him with a look. "But here's what I will do. You asked for 40%. You can have 10. 10% of profits, not protection money, a service fee. You provide banking support, clean money when the numbers hit heavy, legal help when our runners get arrested." He leaned back. "And one more thing. You never send your people into Harlem to collect. You want your money, send a courier to my office. I'll have it counted and ready. But your soldiers don't patrol my streets. Your guns don't show up in my neighborhood." The words hung in the air. "Harlem stays black. Harlem stays mine. That's the deal." Silence. Meyer Lansky spoke first. "Charlie, that's smart. 10% for no risk, no overhead, no exposure, clean money." Anastasia wasn't convinced. "What stops him from cutting us out once we set up the banking?" Bumpy answered. "The same thing that stops you from taking Harlem by force. Stalemate. You cheat me, those photographs go public, your protection evaporates. I cheat you, you come after me with everything." He stood. "We both lose, or we both get rich. Your choice." Luciano stared at Bumpy for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly he started to laugh. Genuine. "You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was an idiot. He should have talked to you first." He stood, extended his hand. 10%. Banking and legal support. No soldiers in Harlem. You deliver monthly." Bumpy shook his hand. One firm grip. "We have a deal." Costello exhaled. Lansky smiled. Even Anastasia sat back down. Luciano held Bumpy's hand for an extra second. "I've done business with presidents, cops, union bosses, killers, but you're the first man who came to my table and told me no without pulling a gun. That takes guts or stupidity. I haven't decided which." Bumpy smiled. "Rare, genuine. When you figure it out, let me know." 3 weeks later, Luciano boarded a ship to Italy. He stood on the deck as the SS Laura Keene pulled away from Brooklyn Pier, watched New York City shrink in the distance, watched America disappear over the horizon. He never returned to American soil, never saw Manhattan again. Died in Naples in 1962, 16 years later, at Naples Airport. Heart attack, still in exile. But the deal he made with Bumpy Johnson that night held for 22 years. 22 years of 10% delivered like clockwork. 22 years of banking services and legal protection. 22 years of an arrangement that made both sides richer than they'd been before. The numbers racket flourished. Harlem stayed independent. Bumpy paid the money every month to Meyer Lansky's representative. The Italians provided banking through their legitimate fronts, provided lawyers when needed, kept their soldiers out of Harlem just like they'd promised. In 1951, when Bumpy got arrested on conspiracy charges and sent to Alcatraz for 11 years, Frank Costello personally made sure his wife and daughter were taken care of. Money every month, protection. Nobody bothered them. Not because Costello was generous, because that was the deal. That was the partnership. And when Bumpy walked out of Alcatraz in 1963, after 11 brutal years in America's hardest prison, the deal was still intact, still holding. Meyer Lansky himself came to Harlem to welcome him back, shook his hand, said the arrangement would continue as long as Bumpy wanted it. That meeting at the Stork Club became legend in organized crime circles, not because of violence, not because of threats, not because someone died, but because two men from completely different worlds, different codes, different cultures, sat down and found a way to do business without destroying each other, found a way to make peace more profitable than war. Luciano would later tell associates in Italy, from his exile in Sicily, sitting in cafes overlooking the Mediterranean. Bumpy Johnson was the smartest gangster I ever met, and the most dangerous, not because he was willing to kill, everyone's willing to kill, but because he didn't need me to respect him. He demanded it, and he had the intelligence and the leverage to back up that demand. That's rare. That's power. Bumpy Johnson never talked publicly about that meeting, never gave interviews, never wrote a memoir, never bragged. But people close to him said he kept that photograph of Albert Anastasia in his office on Lenox Avenue for the rest of his life, framed, hanging on the wall behind his desk where everyone who came in could see it, not as a threat, not as a trophy, not as a warning, as a reminder. A reminder that power isn't about who's willing to pull the trigger first. Power isn't about who has the most guns or the most money or the most soldiers. Power isn't about fear or violence or domination. Power is about who's smart enough to never need the trigger, smart enough to win the war before the first shot gets fired, smart enough to turn a threat into a partnership, smart enough to turn a confrontation into a conversation, smart enough to sit in the boss's chair and make the boss respect it. February 1946. The Stork Club. One photograph, one conversation, one handshake, and Harlem stayed free for 22 more years, stayed independent while every other neighborhood in New York fell under mob control. Stayed black, stayed proud, stayed bumpies. That's not just power, that's legacy. Drop a comment. What would you have done in that room? Would you have sat in Luciano's chair? Would you have pulled out that photograph? Would you have taken the 40% or demanded your own terms? And if you want more stories about the man who made the mob bow to Harlem, about the strategist who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers, about the protector who understood that real power comes from the people, not from the gun, you know what to do.